Right now, it's my honor and privilege to introduce our speakers. Blair Thomas Hess and Cameron Ludwick have co-authored several books together, including A State of Bourbon, Exploring the Spirit of Kentucky, Presidents, Battles, and Must-See Civil War Destinations, Exploring a Kentucky Divided, Famous Kentucky Flavors, Exploring the Commonwealth's Greatest Cuisines, and My Old Kentucky Road Trip, Historic Destinations, and Natural Wonders. Let's welcome them.
Can't believe anybody's got distinguished lecture next to our names.
And so listen, our hesitation about the Filson is lecture series is always, we are the opposite of lecturers. So they've put us at a podium, gave us a microphone and told us we can't move. So, so if we stand like this the entire time, it's because we tend to move a lot and talk a lot. So if you don't hear us or we wander away, just shoo us back this way. We're going to try to behave tonight. Cameron and I have written together as co-authors for about 10 years.
Yes.
We traveled together for 10 or 15 years. We've been friends for about 20 years. So it's fun to be here together. We've never done a Filson lecture, but we're really excited to be here. It's better when we do these together because we tend to finish each other's sentences. We pick up slack where the other forgets things. So if you feel like you are listening to the Bobbsey twins go, you are not wrong.
Yep.
And we'll do our best here to answer any of your questions. So we're going to start tonight by telling you a little bit about ourselves, about our books, about what we've learned about Kentucky, how we got into this. It is a little bit more casual than I think some of them are. So feel free to kind of hang in with us. We'll try our hardest to stay on track. We go down a lot of tangents and rabbit holes, but we're going to try our hardest. And we have slides, so it's with every effort to stay
official.
here. It's official.
It's official.
It's official.
But actually, we're going to get started first. So one of the coolest things about our partnership is that Blair married a professional photographer.
For only this reason.
So for all of our previous books, we have had the wonderful benefit of having really gorgeous professional photographs from all around our gorgeous state. So what we wanted to do is a thank you for everybody who's here in the room with us at the Filson. We actually brought 2 of Elliot's prints. And we would love to give those away to 2 lucky winners this evening. And we thought we might do that by asking a couple of trivia questions. So we're going to try to do this. I'm going to
first. The test part's at
test first.
And then
Test
we'll do
first.
the answers later.
Okay, so we're going to try to go maybe like a raised hand, and I'm going to try to keep an eye out and see who's raising their hand first. You think you can handle that? Can you help? Can you help?
No big deal, I can help.
All right, so let's start with question number 1. And who can tell me which Native American tribe made up the largest percentage of Native Kentuckians before European settlers arrived? Anybody else? I saw Shawnee. That would be the Shawnee. And then I've got a Louisville question, since we're in Louisville. Which president is buried here? Oh my God. Sorry, the back of the right. There it is. Nailed it. Zachary Taylor. We won't get away from you without talking about Lincoln too, but I do want to state for the record that I really would like to bring Zachary Taylor back into the fold as an icon of Kentucky, because I don't think he gets nearly enough credit as being one of our presidents. And I think he should. He spent almost his entire life here and he's buried here. So why don't we claim him in the same breath as Abraham Lincoln? Anyway.
Now she's lecturing. See,
now I'm lecturing. The finger is out.
5 minutes behind a podium and she took off with the lecture. So I mentioned about it. Cameron and I, when we started, we've been friends for a very long time. And we started off writing together, writing road trip guides. And this happened entirely by accident, which if you are a hopeful writer out there, a lot of times authors get very upset with us when we say, well, we accidentally wrote a book together. Yeah. But that's essentially what we did the first time. We paid for it later because books 2, 3, 4, and 5 were infinitely harder to write.
Yep.
But the very first one was truly an accident. We were living in 2 different cities and we were looking for excuses to travel together to visit destinations across Kentucky. So our very first road trip was to Cave City, and it's all Cameron's fault. We were talking about destinations and brainstorming, and she said, well, you know what? I've never been to Mammoth Cave. And I said, well, that's your you're not a Kentuckian. I don't know what to tell you. Like, I don't know how to help this other than we can go there. So we decided we set out to Mammoth Cave, and our very first road trip was Cave City. Now, this was not a My Old Kentucky road trip. This wasn't any sort of purposeful trip. It was two friends meeting in Cave City. We slept in wigwams.
Yep.
Wigwam Village.
Just
number
like
2.
Oprah and Gail.
You might just call us Oprah and Gail, or not. But we slept in wigwams. We did a tour of Mammoth Cave. We actually missed our first tour because we saw a sign on the side of the road going through Cave City that said cheap moccasins. And we were like, yes. And so we stopped, we bought our moccasins, we missed our cave tour, had to do another cave tour. But the point is, we got the whole experience of Mammoth Cave. It was wonderful. We stopped at Dino World on the way out, and you might say, just a dream was born, right? We loved it. And so what we started doing was taking pictures and really bad videos, which we will never share ever again.
We thought we were going to be YouTube famous really early on.
We're influencers. We
were going to influence, and
that was
that
going to be great.
it didn't work out so well.
We were really bad.
Deep dark of the internet.
You might be able to find them, but I would highly recommend you don't do it when we're here. But what we did was we started writing about our experience. We started writing about the cave tour that you should take. There's handicap accessible, there's kid friendly, there's short ones and long ones, and this one's cheaper than this one, and go ask for this guide. And what we didn't realize is we were kind of collecting travel tips and tricks as we went along, and we were blogging about them. Now, I will have a quick aside. We did a presentation in September to a group. I don't think we realized they were all mostly college students, but they were younger, and they stopped us and asked us what a blog was.
Yeah.
And so we had to totally aside, and we were like, well, started with MySpace, and it just went down a rabbit hole. So we'll just tell you for the short version for tonight's sake that we wrote a blog about it, and we started collecting our travels. We traveled around. We went to, here in Louisville, we did the old tuberculosis hospital.
Waverly Hills.
Cameron will
Yeah.
tell you all about it.
Blair probably still has bruises from me clutching to her, doing one of the ghost tours of
Of dragging her.
Yeah,
away.
I'm not good with scary things.
It was the whole thing. But as we started to do this, we weren't paying a lot of attention. We got a blog. We titled it My Old Kentucky Road Trip, probably just driving home. When I tell you all of this was on accident, I truly mean it was on accident. But what happened was we realized that people were Googling Kentucky destinations. This was before Kentucky for Kentucky came out, and they came out with this logo of Kentucky Kicks Ass. And this was before there were big campaigns about Team Kentucky, and Kentucky had some stigmas related to it, still does. But people were Googling destinations in Kentucky, and there weren't a lot of resources coming up. What was coming up were our notes about the castle that sits just outside of Lexington, or tours of Mammoth Cave, or trips to Rabbit Hash, Kentucky. And so we were getting all of these hits on our website, and we didn't even mean to. And so we had a publisher reach out and want to do a book, and thus the long, short version of how My Old Kentucky Road Trip came about.
Became 5 books. Yes.
Became 5 books. So 1 trip to Cave City to 5 books later.
Yep. So now we're here really with our 5th book, which is really our first off the road trip book. And this is largely, Kentucky, y'all, has become a collection of the stories that didn't quite fit along with the road trip. And certainly along our road trips, we really wanted to make sure we were hitting all of the historical high points, but a lot of it was tourism related. What tours are you going to see? Where do you need to go stay, eat, do, whatever? But there's so much behind that we wanted to make sure that we were representing and shouting out. And I think there's such a reason why Kentuckians are proud to be from Kentucky. And I say that as somebody who actually lives in Texas now. I'm sorry, don't hate me.
And pays for it because she's on Central.
You know, I do because I'm in Central Time. But I also like to tell the Texans that everything that they care about came from Kentucky first. They think Sam Bowie is from Kentucky. Absolutely not. So I love to remind them all the time, don't worry. But, knowing that and, competing against the Texans, we're really proud too. And there are lots of reasons to be proud. And that goes back even to the Shawnee. And I think we all love our state. And for Blair and I, it was important for us that our writing and our work was reflecting that love and that passion. I get called out constantly for talking about Kentucky when I'm not in Kentucky, but I think has for both of us become our personal mission and passion to make sure that our state gets mentioned in the same breath as Texas, New York, California, because we are just as amazing and just as special. And we do have those cultural high points, touchstones, history, stories, and people. And that's very much what the new book is celebrating.
It is. So one of the struggles of coming and giving a lecture, official or not, to a group of proud Kentuckians is, what can we possibly tell Kentuckians about Kentucky that they don't already know? And I travel around the state a lot. I still live here in Kentucky, and I talk to lots of groups. And my favorite is you start talking and you kind of ask rhetorical questions. Have you heard of this? Have you been here? And within a couple of minutes, not only have, yes, absolutely all of you been there, you know something about it that I don't, and you're probably correcting me about halfway through, and that's all okay.
We're happy with
We've already told 2 people tonight that the reason we like doing these things is because every time we do one, people like, have you ever heard of this? Have you read this? Have you traveled to here? And our answer is no, no, and no. Because 5 books later, we still haven't gone to all of the places and seen all of the things. So one of the exciting things is getting to do that. But when we started thinking about today, we were thinking about how to talk about things that, again, off the road, we're going to give you lots of road trips. We can't help ourselves, but we do like to think about, what makes an impact and what is influential. So when we started thinking about that, we started thinking we wanted to share 3 of them, what we consider the most influential places in Kentucky. And we pick these to try to organize them because there are a lot. We picked one of ecological significance, one of historical significance, and then one of cultural significance. But like I said, we're going to sprinkle in some other stuff because it's hard for us.
That's what we do.
It's hard for us not to. So I mentioned Mammoth Cave, and already I'm just going to take a poll because I just want to prove to Cameron she's wrong.
Yeah.
How many people here have been to Mammoth Cave?
Yep,
See?
everybody.
I told you.
Yep.
I told you that everyone has traveled.
Yeah, we got a couple of, yes.
No, don't make her feel good.
You can do it.
Don't make her feel good. You have been there and you're making this up to make her feel good. She doesn't need it. She's okay. We're going to start at Mammoth Cave, even though all of you have been there. And here is why. I have been to Mammoth Cave. I've lost count. Cameron and I took my daughter there before she could walk. She crawled through Mammoth Cave. It was great. She, learned what an echo was.
Yeah, she loved echoes. That was
the tour guide did not appreciate that. But I mean, there's always a new experience, a new tour, a new thing you'll learn. And every time you go, you get a different tour guide who tells it different. Much like if you come to see us again, we'll probably tell all this different. That's the wonderful thing about these stories. They're all tall tales and we make it up as we go along. But we want to start here at Mammoth Cave as our place of ecological significance in this state. And like I said, I always feel a little bit bad picking the obvious destinations to share with you all because I feel like I'm not sharing the best version, but as Cameron proved, maybe they're not all that obvious. And just in case, as a little aside, we do asides a lot. As a little aside, if you don't happen to learn anything new today of any of our places, because you've been to all of them and you've seen all of them, when you leave here, it's not our book, but get a copy of Dr. Thomas Clark's Kentucky Treasures book. If you haven't read it, I really strongly recommend it. Dr. Clark is perhaps one of the most influential people.
the dean of Kentucky history, if not American history.
Founded the history department at UK.
Yeah.
I mean,
The Kentucky Historical Society.
hugely historian laureate of Kentucky in 1991. Because he is such a great figure in Kentucky, we'll forgive him for the fact that he was born in Louisville, but it was Louisville, Mississippi. So we'll just forgive him that part. We'll just change it. It's Kentucky. It's fine. It's no big deal. But we've already gotten off track. But in this book, a couple of Herald Leader reporters asked Dr. Clark to name his 10 most influential places in Kentucky. And because it was Dr. Clark, he gave 11. And he was working with the reporters on why he chose these places. And they included places like the Abbey of Gethsemane, what are some
Speed Art
the Speed Art Museum here in Louisville, Land Between the Lakes, the Lily Cornett Woods, Shaker Village. And he was writing his reasoning behind them when he died. And so we only have part of his notes, and they talk about this in the book. But it's really interesting to hear kind of his justifications for why these were what he considered to be the most influential places. I think it's incredible. So it's not our book, but go buy the book, read the book, put a plug in for anybody. But back to Mammoth Cave, sorry. Again, we get off track a lot. So according to legend, at the turn of the 19th century, a bear chased John Houchins into Mammoth Cave. He was exploring out near the woods by the cave with his brother Francis, and a bear appears and they chase him in, and so he gets credit for the modern day discovery of Mammoth Cave. In theory. And I tell you that because there's also about 10 other accounts of different people. Some were hunting, some fell, all different reasons for why we had the modern day discovery. But unofficially, we're going to go with John Houchins. It's kind of like if you travel to any of the bourbon distilleries in the area. You go to the first one and they say we're the best and the
First
and the longest
yeah.
operating. And then coincidentally, you drive 2 miles down the road, and that one's also the first and the best and the longest operating. So, but the first record of Mammoth Cave was listed in the Warren County Survey Book in 1796, and it names Valentine Simon as the cave's first legal owner, or at least the 200 acres of the cave that were first on record there. In truth, there were dozens of people probably there before, and before that, Native Americans who had also, there's bones and there's cave drawings and all kinds of evidence that Native Americans were also there. It runs under Edmondson, Hart, and Barron counties today. The Green River flows through it, and its tributary, the Nolan River. And if you have been far west in Kentucky to Cadiz, Kentucky, in Trigg County, there is a spring located called Blue Springs. It's conveniently located right behind the pro shop at Boots Randolph Golf Course. So if you go to Lake Barkley and you go to the golf course, you walk behind the golf course, there's a spring there. When I was growing up, my dad told me that as divers had been in the spring and they had never found the bottom. And that's probably not true because my dad tells a lot of stories. But I always loved the idea that it was true. And he would tell me that it connected to Mammoth Cave. So every time I go on a tour of Mammoth Cave, I ask them, have you ever heard of Blue Springs? And they say no. And I say, did you know that the cave connects to Blue Springs? And they say, I don't think it does. But one of these days, I'm going to get a job as a Mammoth Cave tour guide, and I am going to prove this theory with all of my experiences. But some of the first historical writings of Mammoth Cave, it was referred to Saltpeter Cave because it had such an incredible amount of saltpeter. I know all of you know what saltpeter was used for and why it was so important.
Anybody want to shout it out? Dynamite. Yes.
Dynamite. It was
Gunpowder.
Gunpowder. It was used a lot. In the 1800s, it was used to make gunpowder. And so about 1/5 of the bullets fired in the War of 1812 were fired with gunpowder created from saltpeter in Mammoth Cave. Obviously, not anymore. We're not mining it. We're still exploring it. And a lot of what the modern day version of Mammoth Cave and some of the explorations were all thanks to a man named Stephen Bishop. If you go to Mammoth Cave and you take one of the best tours, which is just the historic tour, you will go through things like Fat Man's Misery and Tall Man's Misery and what's the deep one? Bottomless pit and all these things. And all of those are credit to Stephen Bishop, who was an African-American man. He was a slave and he was sent into the cave with just a lantern. So this photo is actually taken, and this is deceptive because it's light in there. It's the magic of cameras and things that I don't understand. But it's light in there, but this is actually pitch black in the cave and only lit by this man's lantern. He's turned on the lights there. You can see a spotlight. But if you go in this cave, they will turn out the lights for you. They will light the lantern and you will see, there's no dark like being in a cave. That is dark. And then they will lay. And so when you see up, you see all the black soot on the on this cave surface there. All of that is from soot and things from the lanterns that were there. So one of the very first people to charge patrons for cave tours in Mammoth Cave was in the 1920s. Any guesses as to how many people that very first year was open in 1920 to take tours through? How many people paid and took a tour of Mammoth Cave?
You're all way too high.
Closer. It was one. One person went through and paid. I would not listen. Don't even worry about it. I think it's recovered. If you've taken a cave tour recently, you'll see that each one of them averages about 50 people. So it's doing all right. You don't have to worry about Mammoth Cave. It's perhaps today one of our most famous natural wonders, our only national park. Just ask Cameron. She knows all about it.
Yeah.
She's been there. But here's why I think it's so incredible, and I get upset with Cameron when she tells me she hasn't been. And for you who haven't been, I encourage you to go. It is the world's longest known cave system, and it's not even like a little bit the longest. It's like a lot bit the longest. That's my official lecture word of the day, a lot bit. We know that there are about 400 miles of the cave that have been discovered. You don't see that many, don't worry. If you don't want to walk 400 miles, they don't make you.
You don't have to.
We go through about 10 miles of it on all the tours, not at once, don't worry, most of them about 1 mile or so. But about 400 miles of the cave have been discovered. But we know it's bigger than that, and there's actually still activity going to explore more. I asked the last time I was there, just in the fall of this past year, I was like, are they not really still looking for more, are they? And they said, oh, absolutely. They're absolutely looking for more. The second closest is an underwater cave in Mexico called Sac-Actun, and it is only 235 miles long. And here we are, right in our backyard, short distance down the road, the longest cave system. So I really do encourage you to go.
I will actually, if you don't mind, a shout out back to Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The other great usage for Mammoth Cave in our historical record certainly was also its use as a tuberculosis hospital, much like Waverly Hills. Because the cave was humidity controlled, temperature controlled, they felt that tuberculosis patients would have the best chance of recovery by being in those environments. Sorry to say that actually was not quite the case,
Much like here, it was not the case.
unfortunately.
And there are no longer tuberculosis patients in Mammoth Cave. In case you were wondering.
Perfectly safe.
We will have an aside here just because I promised you we would. So has anyone been here? This is Cumberland Gap. So Cumberland Gap, and this is taken from a vantage point, but it actually is this little dip right there in the middle. Cameron can point it out for you. It's a little dip. And it doesn't look very impressive from this picture, but it is pretty impressive. It's another historically significant destination. If you want to get a glimpse of what the very earliest settlers saw when they were coming to Kentucky, and they were moving west, go to Cumberland Gap. It's really incredible, and that's kind of, you get an idea of what they first saw when they got here.
Trees. It was
Interesting. Cameron's in Texas now, so she loves
I
her
miss
some
the trees so much.
She misses all the trees. Virginia physician and explorer Dr. Thomas Walker rediscovered this passage after Native Americans had been through it in 1750, and he named it for King George II's son, the Duke of Cumberland. Now, looking at this photo again, like I said, you can't really tell the impact, but if you think of it this way, on either side of that gap, so it goes down here, it's about 300 feet from the bottom of the gap, the valley there, 300 feet in the gap. If you go up there, the sides there are about 2,500 feet. So if you think about having to go through on foot or on horseback or with a covered wagon, a 300 feet pass is probably a lot easier to navigate than 2,500 feet. And I always think of it this way. It took about 160 years for Americans to go from the Atlantic coast to Cumberland Gap. So from the moment the settlers arrived in America to go from Atlantic to the Cumberland Gap, it took 160 years. It took 70 years to reach 3,000 more miles to the other ocean. So this did a whole lot for the whole movement west and the founding of the rest of the country. So I would suggest you go. If you haven't been, I don't think I'm allowed to say my favorite way to visit is in Tennessee. I think there's a contract that says I have to say it's Kentucky.
You better whisper it.
So, okay, so you can access the Cumberland Gap from 3 different states, from Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. I like the Tennessee one, but the Kentucky one's the best one.
Kingdom
Is that
Come is also
okay?
pretty.
That's the one. Okay, that's how I said it.
Absolutely.
At one point you can stand in 3 states, which is really cool. If you haven't done that, I would encourage you to do that. And of course, if you haven't been to the first KFC in Corbin, and I know KFC is a hot topic right now, but the very first restaurant is in Corbin, and on your way, you can stop there.
Yes.
I'm gonna take a break. I need a water.
Yeah, you need
a
a water.
I'm trying to take a break. It's your turn to
I was
lecture.
like ready to pull out the shepherd's crook and.
Apple prod, something.
So we promised presidents, along with Zachary Taylor, of course, probably our best known president from the state is, of course, Abraham Lincoln. Certainly wrote the Gettysburg Address, Emancipation Proclamation, but first he was a Kentuckian, of course. He was born on a farm in LaRue County to Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, and they of course moved to Sinking Springs Farm when he was born. After he was born, they paid about $200 for their acres near Nolan Creek, and the spring is still on the property that you can go down and visit.
If you haven't been this picture. Sorry.
No, please go in.
This picture, if you're looking at it, the springs is like right here.
Yeah.
Like right
Down
here,
around the
it's
hill.
out of the shot. So.
I would also highly recommend, as Blair and I learned, that you should probably show up at least an hour or two before the park closes. Because when you show up a little bit late in the day and you have to sprint up those stairs, it's not the most ideal way to go see the cabin.
possible, it's just not.
You may have also seen the statue of Abraham Lincoln in Springfield and near Hodgenville. And of course, that was because the family was kicked off their farm at a certain point and had to move. And then, of course, they ended up in Illinois. We'll forgive them. So certainly inside the Grand Memorial is a cabin. And I'm sure you all know that it's not the real cabin.
Really?
Alas.
They might have thought it was the real.
Listen, we see some nods. We see some nods. Unfortunately, I think we've been disabused of the notion, and the park rangers will refer to it still as the symbolic birth cabin, which it's such a weird phrase.
Symbolic.
So after the assassination in 1865, a Washington, D.C. newspaper sent reporters to Hodgenville to try to find the original Lincoln cabin. But when they came to the farm, there was not even a foundation stone. Funny enough, there actually is a rock in the interpretive area at the park with a stone said to have Thomas Hanks, Abe's father. Excuse me, not Tom Hanks.
That's a whole other trivia.
Nancy Hanks, I'm sorry. I'm like, his mother was Nancy Hanks and then Thomas Lincoln. Pardon me.
I liked it better with Tom.
I liked, guys, Tom Hanks was Lincoln's dad. It's gonna happen. Anyway, there's a stone in the museum, in the interpretive museum, with what is said to be Thomas Lincoln's initials carved into it, but that's unconfirmed. But no foundation stone. The cabin had disappeared. But the cabin itself that is still there is still historic. So there are about 20 core samples pulled from the logs in this cabin to determine that they were actually from the 1840s. Now, popular legend says that parts of this cabin actually also came from the Jefferson Davis cabin, which was about 70 miles away in Fairview, Kentucky. So when this cabin that they built from trees near Sinking Springs went on tour along with P.T. Barnum and along with some other circus and fair events, the logs, of course, got mixed up as they were taking down, rebuilding cabins, moving from place to place. The touring birth cabins were making their way across the United States and constantly getting jumbled up. So scientists have recently pulled core samples from the logs of the current cabin to determine that these are historically accurate logs from the 1840s, but they believe that the logs have actually come from a local farm down the street from the park. And while they were very similar to the logs of what the Lincoln's cabin would have been made of, it's slightly newer.
Touring birth cabins, I just can't.
So this cabin, or at least these logs that have made this cabin, came back to Kentucky in 1906 among plans to actually build a national memorial. So the foundation stone was laid by President Theodore Roosevelt, was our first president who decided that there should be a national memorial to Abraham Lincoln here in Kentucky. And the building was dedicated by President Taft. There's actually a very cool photo also on site where you can see the dedication ceremony, and you would not believe how many people were in attendance. And what I personally love about it is everybody's in their top hats and tails for the occasion. And you can very easily pick out President Taft's bulk amongst the crowd in the photo. That's polite. So the building itself, as you can see, so for Blair and I, who arrived about 20 minutes before closing, we jogged up the 56 steps leading up to the building, which represents the age of the president that he was killed. There are 16 windows, 16 rosettes on the ceiling, 16 fence poles around the cabin inside, and all for our 16th president. And finally, does anybody else know, this is kind of going to be a vague trivia question, the other great sort of original thing that Abraham Lincoln was known for? Not the Civil War, not the president thing. And it's housed at the Kentucky Historical Society.
It's not fried chicken.
Excuse me? Not his watch. He is our only president to have a patent. He was also an inventor. So he does have a registered patent. The only president to do so. It was a design for a boat to lift a boat over shoals. So he had a patented invention for sort of bladders that would sit on the base of a flat boat or of a keel boat that could be inflated to help lift and float the boat over narrow ways like the Falls of the Ohio.
If you go to the Fraser History Museum here in Louisville, they have a copy of the patent, so go see that.
Gorgeous. Whoop. There we go.
That's not it.
More inventions.
That's a different
Different one. Oh, yeah, actually, there's the patent.
one.
No, I'm sorry. I lied. Different patent. I only saw the headline. It is a patent. So certainly inventions are another thing that we love talking about. And whenever we've done events with kids as well, that tends to be the real winner. So it doesn't ever surprise us anymore that the two, best topics that people tend to respond most to are when we talk about food and food festivals here in Kentucky, and then of course, inventions. And some very cool things were invented here in Kentucky. So Garrett Morgan, certainly a Black inventor from Paris, Kentucky, patented the 3-position traffic signal. And that is the patent that's over there on the right. Before that, he also patented a safety hood and smoke protector, which became our early gas masks, which when he invented that in the early 19 teens, became pretty important in the World Wars. In 1916, he made national news after Garrett Morgan used his gas mask to rescue several men trapped during an explosion in an underground tunnel beneath Lake Erie. And today, the Garrett Morgan Transportation Technology Education Program helps K through 12 students learn how to become transportation professionals. So we can thank that for all of our good infrastructure. Now, I already shouted out Jim Bowie, who is a Kentuckian and not a Texan. His long hunting knife, where he designed a new blade following a really infamous duel, the sandbar fight. He designed this particular blade with a blacksmith that we now know as the Bowie knife. And of course, one of our favorites here in Louisville was of the young son who was helping his dad in their woodworking shop, who was constantly sneaking away to go to baseball games. When Louisville Eclipse star Pete Browning had an issue with his bat that broke during a game, and the son offered that his dad, the woodworker, could probably help him make a new bat. And of course, when the bats made by the Hillerich family were so fabulous and well made, they adopted the name of, or Pete Browning's nickname, which was, of course, the Louisville Slugger. Shocker. You'll also find, if you go down to Museum Row, you go a couple blocks or about a half a block past the Slugger Museum down to that overpass, and underneath you'll find the monument to Mildred and Patty Hill, the inventors of the birthday song as we know it, Happy Birthday.
An important aside I have to tell you about Cameron, if
Yes.
there is a historical marker
Always read the sign.
or a cemetery, we will be stopping.
Yes.
And some of those cemeteries are beautiful, like the one here in
Yes.
Louisville. Some of them are less beautiful. Like
I dragged her to Alvin Barkley's gravesite out in Western Kentucky.
it was just flat.
Site was
hot.
pretty, but it was
No, it's always the hottest day of the summer when she wants to stop at a cemetery.
the Everly Brothers.
There
was
is a
a-
cemetery that has absolutely no trees
Right.
in it. Also, all of the headstones look the same, and she's like, let's find us one. And I'm like, that's fantastic. But she also stops at every historical marker, which is why we found the Happy Birthday historical marker, because it is unassuming under an overpass in the middle of like a median.
in like a 6-car parking lot.
One person has to have a safety vest on to
Yeah.
hold traffic. The other has to go read it. It's a whole operation.
Dear Filson members, here's your new campaign.
Move the Happy Birthday historic marker. We're on record asking for this. This is our whole petition. I want to mention this just because she talked about Jefferson Davis. If you've not been to the Jefferson Davis Monument, it's in Pembroke, Fairview
Near
area,
Fairview,
near
yep.
Fairview. The thing that I find interesting about Jefferson Davis and Abraham Lincoln, and I know it's controversial and there's lots of folks about it, but the presidents during the Civil War grew up 70 miles from one another. I just think that it's fascinating that 70 miles separated these two folks. One moved to Illinois, obviously with his family, one moved to Louisiana with his family, and they led very, very different lives, clearly. Well, maybe not that different, actually, but different ideals. But if you haven't been, it's a fascinating monument. It's really cool. It's a big obelisk, looks a lot like
The Washington
the
Monument.
Washington Monument. It's the third tallest obelisk in the country, the sixth in the world. The Washington Monument in DC is the second tallest. Does anyone have a guess of the tallest
In the country,
in the country?
obelisk.
It's not the DC one. It's not this one.
And I will say this one is 3/5 the size of the Washington Monument. And this is number 3. Washington is number 2. But number 1, sad to say,
Of course.
it's in Texas.
Yes, of course.
It's the San Jacinto Monument. So
It's the one thing you can't.
I
say,
know.
Like, theirs
You can
is
say-
taller, theirs is taller.
they,
Anyway.
listen, they're proud too. Fine.
They do great tours. You go to the top. It's worth going and seeing. It's worth learning about our history. The last thing we want to talk to you about today, it's our last significant Kentucky destination. And it's our cultural, our item of cultural significance. And it's not just a place to go. It's a whole lot of places to go. I think local food is what we've kind of deemed is like the cultural significance for Kentucky. There's a lot of culture around food here. There are a lot of food festivals. We have an entire book about food festivals.
Also happen on the hottest day of the year.
Every
Every
day.
year.
There is nothing like the Burgoo Festival in Anderson County. Like the hottest day of the year, and they're stirring a pot of Burgoo.
Steaming.
And they're like, you want some? You're like, absolutely not. Like there is nothing you want on a hot summer day like a pot of Burgoo. That or Winchester does the beer cheese festival, and it's like spicy beer cheese, and it's so hot.
Sweating.
And they're like, you want some more beer cheese? You're like, not even a little bit. It's not refreshing in the least. We're gonna have to that's our next campaign. After we move the happy birthday marker,
Move the food festival.
move the food festivals on the calendar. They all have to go.
L8 can stay in the, stay
Yeah,
on.
they do give you L8, but gosh, it is hot. I think, when we started writing our food book and we started traveling to these festivals, we started seeing things in common. There was so much community and culture and history built up around these, and almost, a little bit of just lore. There was a lot of folklore and stories about these food festivals. Why is the largest world chicken festival in Kentucky, in Corbin? Why do we celebrate barbecue in almost every city? I mean, Owensboro wants to own it, but
really,
it's like
yeah.
every city has a barbecue festival. I mean, why is there an important significance to us in our food? And a lot of it comes from the history of the settlers here. If you go to Northern Kentucky, a lot of German immigrants into Northern Kentucky, you can go to the Geta Festival, which if you all have not had Geta, I would encourage you to have Geta, pronounced Geta. And so there's just so much interesting history with food that we encourage you to find a list, go to travel to these places. Kentucky is home to a lot of famous inventions. Here in Louisville, of course, the hot brown we know was invented here. The inventor of Bib lettuce is a Frankfurt lawyer who grew it in his backyard. I will tell you right now that Carl Kalin here in Louisville absolutely invented the cheeseburger. We do not believe Denver, Colorado and their Humpty Dumpty business. Like that is not a thing. It was here. But there are so many things that were invented and we'll say perfected here. I don't think we can say that fried chicken was invented here, but I think we can say it was perfected.
Perfected for sure.
Even though we said we weren't going to talk about fried chicken today because the whole KFC thing, we're not going to talk about it. But it is worth going in Corbin if you haven't been. And to the World Chicken Festival, that is the world's largest chicken fryer. Right there, isn't that beautiful? In Trigg County in Western Kentucky, you can have the world's largest country ham biscuit. Another great thing. It's 2,000 pounds. You don't have to eat it all. It's 10 and a half feet in diameter. It's baked in a custom built oven. If you guys haven't seen it, it's literally an oven trailer that they pull behind a truck into the church parking lot to cook the 10.
I believe it
biscuit.
lives at a local business or in a backyard for the rest of the year.
Maybe we could do a travel. We could do a circuit.
I think we should do a circuit.
A
for
travel
the biscuit
circuit.
oven.
If you're interested in making the recipe at home, I'm gonna give it to you. So write this down. 150 pounds of flour, 2 pounds of salt, 6.5 pounds of sugar, 39 pounds of shortening, 39 cups of water, 13 gallons of buttermilk. I think that's manageable. And don't worry, for the hams, it takes about 16 large baked hams and they need to be country. So you're going to have to cure those for a while. So just go ahead and get started. I think we probably got enough time, maybe here by this summer. By the hottest day of the year, you'll have a country ham biscuit to enjoy. There's a ton of them to go to. My grandmother calls me Tater Baby because I was born on Tater Days in Western Kentucky. So there's a lot to see. My very, very favorite festival to talk about, and I promise you we'll wrap up here soon and let you guys ask us questions, but is the Banana Festival in Fulton. Has anyone been to the Banana Festival in Fulton? You have. Did you have a bite of the world's largest banana pudding? Actually, love world's largest. I will try anything that's the world's largest. I think this is a great idea. If you haven't been, I encourage you to go to the Banana Festival in Fulton. It is, it really, it's weird, right? Bananas, Kentucky, it's the climate, right? It's the hot days, that gets us bananas. No, I mean, it's weird, but does anyone have any guesses as to why we celebrate bananas in Fulton, Kentucky?
Bring it.
Trains.
Almost.
Right, it's trains.
Transportation, it's boats.
It's refrigerated rail cars.
Yeah.
This is why we can't do, this is why we can't do trivia together because it never works out.
Also boats, also boats.
When the refrigerated rail car was invented, in the early 19th century, they started moving bananas from South America, where they were grown in Central America. They could come into port at Louisiana and travel up the Mississippi River, or they could now go by rail car in a refrigerated rail car. The problem was about halfway to their destination in Chicago, the ice melted. And so the only ice house along the track was in Fulton, Kentucky. So every single refrigerated rail car would stop in Fulton, Kentucky.
Unload the bananas.
And re-ice and then reload them. So at one point, most of the world, all of the bananas consumed in the United States had passed through Fulton. And so they celebrate every year with a banana queen and a banana pudding. And if you haven't been, I really, really encourage you to go.
Yes. I would also love to shout out that the last thing that that I did the weekend before I moved to Texas and Blair and I went together was to go to the International Barbecue Festival in Owensboro.
You
It
did.
was the last thing we
sending
did.
you to Texas.
Yep.
Which is famous for barbecue.
Nope, it's Kentucky barbecue.
Okay, well, I thought we should have thought through that. Should have done something else. We bring up the Derby because we feel like we have to. We are showing this slide because we're in Louisville and now we can
Feels
check.
real silly to, yeah.
But we always encourage folks, if you haven't been to the Derby, even and the number of Louvillians I meet who have not been, we encourage you to give it a try and go at
At least
some
the
point.
Oaks.
So tomorrow, the land where we will live. We talked earlier about the Shawnee being the first here, but this is the Cherokee translation of the word Kentucky. And I always share this with people because it really speaks to kind of what we've been talking about, this love letter to Kentucky that Cameron and I have spent 5 books writing. I am a 7th generation Kentuckian. I'm raising an 8th generation Kentuckian. My parents put us on the road all the time and traveled us around. We traveled to all the state park lodges. We did Mammoth Cave. We did all of the things we were supposed to do as proper Kentuckians. And so we've kind of made it this quest to do it the same. Like I said, my daughter crawled through Mammoth Cave before she could walk. She knows what night at the state park lodges that they serve chocolate cake. We go there only on those nights. And that's really what we are encouraging folks to do, is to get out and explore your own backyard. Even if you've been to some of these places before, try it again. You don't have to take our word for it. Our approach was to try to make it fun for folks. We didn't want to teach people a bunch of history because we figured we'd bore them to death. So it was, how could we trick you into learning it?
False.
I lectured today. I had a podium.
We
and
love
everything.
history. I love history.
Podium.
Well, this is why I drag Blair to all of the historical markers. Always read the signs. Certainly for my part, even under a bridge, certainly for my part, I'm also a 7th generation Kentuckian. Dad has done the full genealogy backwards. I'll say his line, his people are from right here in Louisville, and also from the E-Town area. My dad grew up in J-Town, and there's actually a little Ludwick family plot over in Cave Hill.
Jim, like to go to it.
I will absolutely take you on that tour.
It'll be hot too.
So I think if you take anything away from us, it's certainly always stay curious. And there are, even if you've been in Kentucky your entire life, if you've left, if you've come back, if you've come here later in life, there are so many things you will never finish exploring. There are so many places to go. There are so many people to meet. We've met people at the Monroe County Marble Superdome. We've had chats at the Banana Festival. We talked to this man selling us moccasins for hours about his antique shop and all of his license plates he bought from the prison.
That's why we were late.
That's why we were late for our cave tour. Just never stop exploring, because there will never be an end to it, because Kentucky has always been special and will always be special. And there are special things happening every day. So thank you all so much for having us. We're always happy to be back in our home state and talking to Kentuckians.
Live here.
Happy to be back in my home state. Thank you.
We are happy to take any of your questions, and there's a 50% chance we'll know the answer. And we'll make it up if we don't.
Yeah.
And I've got the mic, so if you do have a question, just raise your hand. I'll run it out to you so you can ask.
Oh, there we go. We also take suggestions.
Oh.
I've got a pen.
I'd like to invite you to Georgetown, Kentucky. In that cemetery there are, I got one better than Jefferson Davidson and Abraham Lincoln.
Fabulous.
We've got a Union governor, Union Army governor, James Fisher Robertson, and a Kentucky Confederate governor, George Washington Johnson, in the same cemetery.
Is it near the university? I love a cemetery. Bring me all of them. Listen, I used to meet my dad at his office out Leestown Road in Lexington. And we'd go to lunch together and we'd pop a bag of popcorn and go over to the Lexington Cemetery and feed the geese until the geese started chasing us. And then that stopped, but maybe that had something to do with
I'm not writing a Kentucky Cemeteries book. Is not happening.
I've signed it.
Nothing. Thank you for that suggestion. Thank you. Question?
It's okay.
Everything. Great.
Please.
We don't have any Audubon, no, we don't have any in the book. The current book is the illustrations were all done by a local illustrator, but if you haven't been to Henderson and gone to the Audubon Museum and Park and things, it's wonderful. You should absolutely go.
Yeah.
I have a couple of books at home it's very, very cool.
I would say that we actually have not done Audubon because I think it has been done. There's a really beautiful book on Olmsted Parks, and especially takes care, Olmsted, and especially takes care of talking about the relationship of Audubon coming into the state. And I'm gonna blank on the name of the family that he stayed with, and did all of his paintings with. Gosh, I shouldn't have started
We'll think
talking
of it.
because then I lost my train of thought. I'll think of it in a minute.
Well, we've got a couple from the virtual audience. You mentioned rabbit hash. What is your take on the rabbit hash general store?
Oh, interesting. Our take. I'm gonna guess that has something to do with the fact that Rabbit Hash isn't really a town anymore.
That's who you asked.
It does have a mayor. The mayor is a dog. When we visited, the mayor was Miss Lucy Liu. And it costs $1 to vote, and you can vote as many times as you want annually for the mayor. I do think Rabbit Hash is very cool historically, though. Certainly back when the world was a lot colder. Actually, the river used to freeze near Rabbit Hash. It was right on the Ohio River, and there was a huge economy between Rabbit Hash and the town across the river in Indiana. And folks would just walk on over, skate on over. I think it certainly is worth a visit now. It's a gorgeous drive, if anything.
I
A
will
great spot
say-
for lunch.
When we wrote the first book, My Kentucky Road Trip, which came out in 2015, we had been to Rabbit Hash, we'd taken photos, we'd had this great town experience, and then 3 years later, it burned to the ground. Totally burned to the ground, but they have completely rebuilt it. So the photo might be slightly different, but I mean, it has been completely rebuilt. It is worth going. I mean, it is a tourist destination. It is a lot of
Still
fun.
barn dances.
A lot of fun. They do have barn dances on the weekends.
We've got another one here, and I could take this one in a number of ways, so I will be interested
We'll
to
pick
hear your
ours.
take on it. What has been your most surprising experience in Kentucky?
Ooh.
I don't know if it was surprising. One of the most memorable experiences in Kentucky, I think, was we did Fancy Farm together before the first book, and we went in and knew nothing. So Fancy Farm is a wonderful tradition in Kentucky, regardless of your political beliefs, because both sides come, and it is just a good old fashioned stump speech weekend, and crazy things occur in costumes and political speeches and
Bingo and
lots of activity. People camp out. There are crazy cars. I mean, I don't even know how to explain it, but it was like a whole experience. It was one of the crazier things that I don't know if it was my most surprising, or what was the question? I've forgotten the question. Surprising.
I think for myself, I mentioned the Everly Brothers a little bit, and this was one of those detours I made Blair take because for me, it's the brown signs on the side of the road, and they say, Bill Monroe home place, Everly Brothers home place. I'm like, obviously, we got to take the exit and let's go to Central City. And I did make Blair try to go find Phil Everly's tombstone. But we were told that we needed to find the Everly Brothers Museum, that there was a museum somewhere around town, and we were circling around town. We had gone through all these headstones. We never found anything. And so finally, as we're like about to leave, and I'm gonna drag Blair to the Alvin Barkley gravesite to another cemetery. We pull over to the McDonald's in town to grab a Coke, a Diet Coke, and get back on the road. And what you know, you walk in and there's a giant display case in the middle of the McDonald's with a whole bunch of Everly Brothers memorabilia. Records, shoes, autographs. So in the end, we did find the Everly Brothers Museum.
That's the real one, like, we're like, where? Mm-hmm. So go there, up here, Central City.
Please look at this.
About where?
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Yes.
I was just in Harlan not too long ago, and I left alive. Here I am. No, it's beautiful. I mean, it's, the drive to Harlan is, do it in the fall.
Bar none.
It's incredible.
Yes,
Very
sir.
beautiful.
When I was a kid in the 1950s, whenever you wanted to go out to eat at a really fancy restaurant, it would almost invariably have a very strong Southern tradition to it.
Yes.
They might have a cake that they would say was Robert E. Lee's favorite cake, and it was always fried chicken and country ham. And now I'm happy we have so much choice and so many diverse offerings.
Yeah.
But is there a place that particularly appeals to you as a bastion of that old style
Good.
fried chicken and country ham and biscuit routine?
God,
Well, I'm actually going to shout out my grandmother's biscuits.
that's not a restaurant.
I know. I'm sorry. Listen, but
Also not a, okay, go ahead.
although I will say, to answer your question, I do think the Beaumont Inn is really, really great in Harrodsburg. I really love, but I wanted to shout out my grandmother's biscuits because I learned something fun at another event. So my grandmother, every year, she would host the big Christmas party on Christmas Eve, and that was the thing. And all the girls, we wore tinsel halos. It was the best. And until she got a little bit older, she would always make beaten biscuits. And I don't know if anybody's had beaten biscuits. And she had a special machine. It was like an old mangle that you used to have to do laundry with, that you would run the biscuit dough through like 100 times. And they make these really small, dense, kind of salty biscuits, but they're lovely. I mean, I love them, but I think for most folks, you either love them or you hate them. But we were at an event, and what you know, a woman came up and told me that her mother used to make beaten biscuits, but it was the barrel of the double barrel shotgun that she used to beat her dough with. And that was the best for getting a good whack on your dough to make the beaten biscuits.
And sometimes Cameron and I have to keep a straight face when someone tells us that they used to beat their biscuits with a shotgun. To answer your question more appropriately, because Cameron's grandmother does not have a restaurant. I would say, I mean, there's so many, anything with an inn after it, the Woodford Inn, the Beaumont Inn, those are fantastic. Woodford Inn is in Versailles. In Lexington, if any of you are around Lexington, I guess also Midway area, Weta Michael is a chef that has several restaurants, and she tries to keep, it's kind of modernized. And she is very, very good friends with Chef Edward Lee, who is of course here in Louisville. And the thing I like about Edward Lee, he is not a traditional meat and three type, but I like that he is honoring the tradition of that, but he is modernizing it and doing some Asian fusion and some other things. So I like that Kentucky has kind of become a space where they can take some of the traditions and modernize and infuse them and make it a little bit more of a foodie destination.
I would also love to really shout out one of Kentucky's poet laureates, Crystal Wilkinson, has a new book that's called Praise Song for Kitchen Ghosts. And it's in particular about all the Black women who had these food traditions specifically from Kentucky and from the Appalachian area with their recipes and their traditions that were passed down. Because so often it wasn't the white women who owned the large plantation homes that were cooking, it was the Black women who were working as cooks in the kitchen. And even if a white woman put her name on that recipe book, the recipes actually came from the Black women. So it's a really, really beautiful book called Praise Songs for Kitchen Ghosts.
Great place to eat. Land between the lakes. I'm going to like.
Lake Barkley Lodge, that's our favorite. Or Kennedy's 1880 settlement.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Another burn, didn't it burn? And it's rebuilt, but I think it also burned.
Yeah.
Patty's is wonderful. There's also a little drive-in-esque place called Blues, but it's spelled Belew. And it's like a little drive-up ice cream, burgers, hot dogs thing, and it's kind of near Patty's. It's on that kind of stretch. It's very cool.
I love the lodge as well for some.
Yeah, the lodge, like I can tell you, Thursday nights is chocolate cake night. But there's also Farrell's hamburgers and Cada's and Hopkinsville and Henderson and somewhere else.
Yeah.
Madisonville.
Madisonville, yep. Here we got one in the back.
Yes, on a global basis, In the 1970s, the state had the two most well-known people in the world. You know who they were?
In the seventies. Well, yeah, it's Colonel Sanders. I heard that one. Are you gonna say Duncan Hines for the other? Muhammad Ali. Excellent. Listen, I would throw Duncan Hines in there as well. Also a great museum and was a real person, if you didn't know. If you ever go to the Western Kentucky University campus, there's a museum. Maybe, but they have a recreation of Duncan Hines's kitchen, which I think is lovely. But is that who you're thinking of? Who else are you thinking of?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cameron and I we like to play a game when we travel international together of how long until we see a KFC. It's usually in the airport. Yeah, before we leave.
We got a microphone coming for you.
Can you say something about the significance of King Run? And also, what about the barn dances down in Rosine and Jerusalem Ridge down there in that area too?
See, those are things we're gonna have to add to our list.
I will say, we've been to
Because
Cane
those are right in your,
Run.
those are right in your neck of the woods.
We've been to Cane Run Meeting House, and that is a really neat place. It was in Dr. Walker's book as well. I would recommend going there. It's just got a lot of original community of some of the earliest settlers of Kentucky. I would definitely encourage going there, but we have not been to the other two. So we will add this to our list.
There are barn dances at Rabbit Hash, though, I will say. We were not on time to do the Rabbit Hash barn dances, but there's definitely some barn dances. Anybody else?
Well, all right. Thanks, everybody, for really, yeah, another round of applause, please.
And of course, come chat with us at the reception as well.